interesting study there, and the results of that study actually are soon to be published this year. But really great results on that. He's very, I'll use the word, immersed in lifestyle interventions for people. He is known as an expert. He gives many invited we feel, I like hearing my voice twice, but we feel quite honored and blessed that he's here with us for this next 3 weeks. So Dr. John.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. And it's my pleasure to be with you. And yes, it seems like I've been trying to do two things at the same time for too long. But anyway, so tonight we're going to be talking about the common denominator of disease. And you might be surprised to learn that over 80% of doctor visits, this is a published statistic, over 80% of doctor visits in the United States are actually caused by a single disease. Just let that sink in a second, and it surely seems like, well, that's ridiculous. How can that be? You know, of all the diseases that we have, how can that be? Well, it's true, but let me explain to you why it seems so unthinkable or unlikely. Because this single disease has many faces, okay? Depending upon what organ it affects most or first. But atherosclerosis is the common cause of most doctor visits in the first world. So what is atherosclerosis? Well, we'll talk about that, and we're going to have a video where a couple of experts are going to talk to us, and then we'll have some time to discuss it at the end. But imagine this, if you would. How much good could we accomplish if we could somehow conquer that one disease, atherosclerosis? Wouldn't it be wonderful if someone could invent a pill or a treatment or something that could eliminate it, reverse it? Well, just to give you a little hint, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic, a very significant and prominent man. In fact, he is a leader in the lifestyle medicine field as well. He says that atherosclerosis is a foodborne illness. And it's a cute soundbite, but the fact is it's true. And as you will learn in the coming days, we not only know that it's a foodborne illness, we also know that how to arrest and reverse it. And there was a time when the expert cardiologists, those are the doctors that specialize in the heart and the circulation and the function of the heart muscle, they actually denied that the calcium buildup in the arteries could disappear until science proved that it's so. Just think about that again for a moment. So what we're saying is that in some cases, the blockages in the aortic artery are so calcified, they show up on an x-ray like they were thin bone. And yet, in a period of months to years, depends on how much changes the person makes, those bone-like blockages disappear. So, the common denominator of disease. I'm going to start this video now where we will listen to our two key speakers, and then we will have questions at the end.
He had just returned from a family visit in Italy. Now he was getting ready for a Sunday assignment, Meet the Press. But he never got to his assignment because at 1:30 that afternoon, the killer struck without any warning, and they found him collapsed on the floor. At 1:44, the rescue team arrived, applied CPR, but all efforts came too late. He was gone. Listed by Time magazine as among the 100 most influential people in the world, Tim Russert was pronounced dead at the age of 58. The autopsy report showed coronary thrombosis, a heart attack, from a ruptured atherosclerotic plaque. How could that have happened? It was only 6 weeks earlier that he had passed his treadmill test with flying colors. His first symptom actually turned out to be his last symptom, sudden death. Atherosclerosis, narrowing and hardening of the arteries, a stealthy killer, an insidious killer, no respect of persons, of race, or of gender. Attacking the heart 4,000 times a day in North America alone, a global killer on the loose. Let's take a closer look at this killer.
I first woke up, so to speak, when I was working on the anesthesia service, learning how to put people to sleep. And I was seeing my patients for the next day's surgery for coronary artery bypass surgery in order to bypass clogged arteries in their heart. Because it was late at night, I drew the man's blood test, and when I took the blood to the laboratory and had it processed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight? He said, yes. I said, what did you have? He said, I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake. And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake. And all this fat had oozed out into his blood and actually turned his blood fatty. The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out the yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
Did you see that? The killer lives within our arteries. Atherosclerosis, the world's most devastating disabling killer, the underlying disease process of most of our chronic diseases. These are diseases that hang around, for which we have no easy medical answer or cure. Chronic diseases, they progress over time, increasingly disabling us and often taking our lives. You know, we're born with clean, flexible arteries, and they should stay that way until we die of old age, but that's not the modern way. In fact, autopsies revealed that 77% of American soldiers who had died on the Korean battlefield had already significantly narrowed arteries, and the average age was 22 years. This is not a disease of aging. This happens when we're teenagers. And then in Korean soldiers, it was difficult to find this disease even in those twice the age. So, atherosclerosis, narrowing and hardening of arteries, it is not a natural process, and it is not inevitably the result of getting older. Heart disease. It really is a progressive disease, isn't it? Because by the time we're about 20 years of age, cholesterol, fats, and calcium have already formed plaques that narrow our arterial lumen by about 20%. By the time we're 45 years of age, the killer is growing inside of our arteries, narrowing our arterial lumen now by about 50%. And by the time we're 70 years of age, many live with a 90% narrowing, leaving only a 10% opening for blood to flow through. These plaques harden like rock, and still many have no symptoms until the killer strikes. So when it comes to heart disease, there's usually nothing wrong with the heart muscle itself, with the myocardium. The problem resides usually inside of the coronary arteries, arteries that sit on top of the fist-sized heart. Their function is to deliver the needed oxygen and other nutrients to the heart muscle to keep it nourished and in good running order. The heart muscle is really an outstanding pump. It's a low maintenance organ. It runs 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, but you have to keep the supply lines open. As the coronary arteries progressively narrow and harden, however, and usually without any symptoms, some symptoms begin to appear. That's when you are lucky. because you can now be reasonably sure that you probably have some 70% narrowing somewhere in your coronary artery tree, and you better take advantage of making some lifestyle changes to reverse this disease process. These symptoms then may appear when you're running up the stairs or as you're chasing after your grandchild. Because you see, with that extra exertion, with that extra workload on your heart, and with the narrowed coronaries no longer being able to deliver the needed oxygen, the heart now screams out in pain. I need oxygen down here. I'm hypoxic. I'm ischemic. I'm starving for oxygen. And that's what we call angina pectoris. It's as if an elephant is sitting on your chest. Angina, then, is a situation where the flow of oxygenated blood to the heart muscle itself is impeded, causing pain in the chest, in the left arm, between the shoulder blades. But a heart attack is different. Here, a coronary artery becomes blocked, which prevents blood flow to a part of the heart muscle, and the muscle begins to actually starve for oxygen, turns blue, and begins to die. It begins to infarct. This is what we call a myocardial infarction. The blockage then can occur on top of or in the midst of these hard plaques that have greatly narrowed the artery. These are responsible for about 10% of our heart attacks. But the other 90% of heart attacks are related to these soft, small plaques that you see here that may only intrude 20 to 40% into the arterial lumen. But with their high cholesterol content, these soft plaques are very vulnerable. They can rupture very easily and then block the blood flow. These are the dangerous plaques. These are the plaques that sometimes go unnoticed even on angiograms. These are the dangerous ones, and these are probably the ones that took the life of Tim Russert. But this buildup of atherosclerotic plaque is not restricted to the coronary arteries alone, where it can lead to angina and heart attacks. This buildup is a diffuse process that can affect many of our larger arteries in different critical areas of the body. Let's take a quick look at how this plaque buildup is involved with many of our degenerative and chronic diseases. It can affect the cerebral and carotid arteries, where the narrowing and hardening is associated with brain attacks, we call them strokes, hearing acuity loss, visual loss, macular degeneration, senility, and also in part with Alzheimer's. When it affects the arteries to the kidney, then we have to be concerned about high blood pressure and kidney disease. When it affects the arteries to the joints, then we have to be concerned about avascular necrosis associated with hip fractures. And when it affects the penile arteries, then we have to be concerned with erectile dysfunction and impotence, which can be a powerful marker for widespread systemic atherosclerosis affecting the whole body. That's why somebody called erectile dysfunction as the canary in the coal mine. It gives us an idea that perhaps the atherosclerotic process is not just limited to one area, but it's probably the systemic process. So when it affects some of the arteries to the back, then we have to talk about herniated disc disease. So these diseases then are characterized by fatty deposits in the artery. They're neither a natural nor a necessary component of aging. So in summary then, you are getting the larger picture now, don't you? Atherosclerosis, an insidious progressive disease process that can be at the very core of many chronic diseases. The clinical expression of this disease process may carry many different disease names, but the underlying disease process is the same, atherosclerosis. And it's this underlying disease process that compromises optimal blood flow and oxygenation and leads to degenerative changes in many organs. Did you know that we have about 60,000 miles of circulatory system? That's about 100,000 kilometers. No wonder that perhaps optimal health depends largely on optimal circulation. Just think about it. More people rust out than wear out. And you're only as young as your arteries. And if you don't take care of your circulatory system, if you don't take care of your arteries, then they cannot take care of you. So I think our marching orders are clear, aren't they? With chronic diseases mushrooming today, what are the predisposing conditions? What drives these modern diseases? Well, the first solid evidence came to us from World War II, when the disease rates of circulatory diseases actually dropped dramatically in industrialized European countries. Millions of people found themselves drawn unwillingly into the largest nutrition experiment ever conducted. That's right. Because with the Nazi armies taking the livestock of the occupied countries to feed their soldiers, the people of these occupied countries were forced to change their customary diet of meat, dairy, and eggs to a more austere diet of potatoes, whole grains, roots, and vegetables. As the consumption of oil and grease and sugar and cholesterol declined dramatically in these countries, so did the rates of circulatory diseases, including heart disease and strokes. But these disease rates returned quickly as Europe got back on its feet and gradually adopted the typical rich lifestyle of cigarettes, cars, and a diet of abundance. While coronary disease was substantially declining during the war in Europe, the same disease was mushrooming in the United States, linked to a major scientific investigation called the Framingham Study. Its purpose was to study the relationship of lifestyle and cardiovascular disease, strokes and heart disease, in a prospective manner. It was initiated in 1949, where they enrolled some 5,000 men and women ages 30 to 60, free of chronic disease, in the town near Boston. And they have followed these people ever since. It's probably the largest study ever conducted in the history of research when it comes to heart disease. This is a gold standard. These people then lived in a scientific fishbowl where everything was measured that could be measured. And the researchers found in short order that those with higher cholesterol numbers or higher blood pressure numbers or greater weight numbers had actually a considerably greater risk of falling prey to heart disease and its underlying disease process called atherosclerosis. As these disease markers, these indicators emerged, they began to call them risk factors because their presence elevated the risk for heart disease and other chronic diseases. To make it a bit more interesting and educationally valuable, I've put these classical risk factors into an arch. So if you look at the first three, the top three risk factors, you will look at cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, you would look at smoking, and you would look at high blood pressure, right? So now you come to principle number 2. The more of these risk factors, the greater your risk. And number 3, some of these lower risk factors, such as age and gender, are not easily changed, but we can do something about the other risk factors. These classical risk factors have become well established, and they're powerful disease predictors for population groups. They allow us to make mathematically driven estimations of risk for populations. So these risk factors become very predictive for population groups in terms of heart disease and atherosclerosis. And fortunately, we can do something about most of these factors. Please note, most of these modifiable risk factors are under the control of our lips, our diet. We can help you to bring your cholesterol down with diet. You can do something about your high blood pressure, your triglycerides, those blood fats, they come down very nicely. You can actually turn off and on in many, many ways type 2 diabetes. And you can do something about obesity and overweight. So these are factors that we can change, and that's what CHIP is all about. But these researchers also noticed, as they looked at a worldwide distribution of heart disease, that developing countries had to rely predominantly on foods as grown, such as corn and beans, potatoes and yams, wheat and rice, fruits and vegetables. But as these countries became more affluent, potatoes and corn turned into chips and corn syrup, and wheat turned into pies and cakes, and beans and grains turned into sirloin steaks and hamburgers. And with food technology being now able to create taste sensations, and with advertising being able to create mass markets, the diet composition underwent a major overhaul. Instead of consuming mostly unrefined, nutritionally laden starchy foods, as you see here. The diet shifted towards more fats and oils, more sugar, and more animal protein. And whatever starch was eaten now came from refined, nutrition-stripped white flour. So it was no wonder that thoughtful nutritionists began to question the wisdom in going in that direction. Here's Dr. Hegstead. He said, the diet of the American people is rich in meat and other sources of saturated fat and cholesterol. And this diet, which affluent people generally consume everywhere, is associated with similar disease patterns, high rates of heart disease, certain types of cancer, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, are major killers. And what's very interesting is that these diseases are not restricted to affluent countries anymore. They're now spreading worldwide. A well-known cardiologist, Jeremiah Stamler, years ago said, the evidence was piling up stronger every day, that it was reasonable to incriminate our rich diet as the primary, the essential, and the necessary cause of our current epidemic of chronic diseases. It's this rich diet and our lifestyle in general that can injure the innermost lining of our arteries, the endothelium. And as this inner lining becomes more permeable to oxidized LDL cholesterol, inflammatory processes are set up that may actually hinder adequate nitric oxide production. And of course, this in turn is needed to Teflonize these innermost linings of the arteries to keep them elastic. So when you look at the various factors, I think the amount of LDL cholesterol in the blood is of particular concern, and particularly the amount of oxidized LDL cholesterol and its suspected relationship to the inflammatory processes.
You've just heard a wonderful discussion about atherosclerosis, a process that causes a waxy, fatty buildup inside your arteries and leads to cardiovascular disease. And these cardiovascular conditions are the main cause of illness and death in modern society. I'm going to share with you now the story of a patient of mine who was forced to deal with the reality of this very condition. He had no idea of the danger that was lurking in his arteries. I'll refer to him by his initials, PW. PW is a 48-year-old man with no history of medical problems. He'd never had a physical exam by a doctor, as he had always been in good health. He wasn't overweight. He exercised regularly. In fact, he ran marathons. Well, one day he decided to get one of those heart scans being offered at a community health fair. The scan checked for plaque and calcium buildup in the arteries of the heart. In his case, the scan found that he had a high degree of dangerous buildup in his arteries. So he was advised to see a doctor. He came to me with the report and pictures from his heart scan and wanted to know what he should do next. Upon talking to him, I learned that he was a smoker, 1/2 pack per day. Also, his father had a heart attack at age 50. In addition to further evaluating his heart condition, this was an opportune time for discussing in detail his risk factors and things he could do to help lessen the odds against him. Your chance of developing cardiovascular disease is closely linked to whether you have more than 2 of several well-known risk factors. They are, first, age. For males, risk increases after age 45. For women, after age 55. Then there's family history. If a father or brother of yours had cardiovascular disease before age 55, or a mother or sister of yours had heart disease before age 65, that is a risk for you. Also, high cholesterol levels in the blood, especially LDL. Next is diabetes. In fact, having diabetes is considered equivalent to already having heart disease. Then we have high blood pressure, and then smoking cigarettes, and also a diet high in cholesterol, high in fat, and physical inactivity. Having more than 2 of these risk factors is a significant increased risk for cardiovascular disease. But the fact is that developing many of the above conditions is closely related to poor lifestyle habits. So there is good news, and that is that healthy lifestyle practices can often help to prevent as well as treat and reverse the effects of many of these conditions. Here is someone you all probably know, someone who has managed to take control of his health through healthy lifestyle changes. President Bill Clinton. Take a look.
How did you lose so much weight? What kind of diet are you on?
Well, Mason, the short answer is I went on essentially a plant-based diet. I live on beans, legumes, vegetables, fruit, no dairy, and it changed my whole metabolism, and I lost 24 pounds, and I got back to basically what I weighed in high school. But I did it for a different reason. I mean, I wanted to lose a little weight, but I didn't dream this would happen. I did it because after I had this stent put in, I realized that even though it happens quite often that after you have bypasses, you lose the veins because they're thinner and weaker than arteries. The truth is that it clogged up, which means that the cholesterol was still causing buildup in my vein that was part of my bypass. And thank God I could take the stents. I don't want it to happen again. So I did all this research, and I saw that 82% of the people since 1986 who have gone on a plant-based, no dairy, no meat of any kind, no chicken and turkey. If you can do it, 82% of the people who've done that have begun to heal themselves. Their arterial blockage cleans up. The calcium depositor in their heart breaks up. This movement has been led by a doctor named Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, Dean Ornish, whom you know, out in California, the doctors Campbell, father and son, who wrote the China study, and a handful of others. But we now have 25 years of evidence. And so I thought, well, since I need to lose a little weight for Chelsea's wedding, I'll become part of this experiment. I'll see if I can be one of those that can have a self-clearing mechanism. We'll see.
I hope you're healthy for many years and get to see grandchildren for many years
Me
to
too.
come.
That's really the big deal. You know, Hillary and I, we're happy. We love our son-in-law and we admire him, but and we'd like to be around. If there's grandkids, we want to be there to do our part.
Mr. President, good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks for what you're doing.
Thanks.
So let me ask you, let me turn my mic on. Let me ask you a couple of questions, and then I want to tell you about these numbers up here. So what is the common denominator? Arteriosclerosis, atherosclerosis, blockages, yes, different words for it. Where does it happen? Happens in our arteries, our blood vessels, right? Specifically, it's the endothelium. The endothelium, so the medical term for this on the skin is the epidermis, right? So the endothelium is the lining inside your blood vessels. You know, sometimes we think of our blood vessels like a pipe or a hose or some sort, but it's not. It's a living organ. The arteries are alive and living, and they're lined with a single cell layer called the endothelium. And he mentioned that. There's so much in there. I'm sure I'm not surprised if you didn't catch this little fact, but he mentioned that the endothelium releases nitrous oxide, which is like, he called it the, what do you call these pans that are non-stick? I'm blanking on the word he used. Teflon. He says it's like the Teflon lining in your vessels. So oxidized cholesterol is the thing that most commonly causes injury to this inner lining and destroys its ability to make nitrogen oxide. And so then it no longer allows the blood flow to go normally. It actually starts to create a sore on the inside. We call those plaque. These were interesting little illustrations. They fall short in some ways, but the point is it does grow into the vessel as well as on the outside and makes the blockage. Let me ask you another question. What are some of the common diseases that were mentioned that's caused by this process of blockages in the arteries? Most obvious one, okay, I'll take the easy one, is the heart. Stroke. So this is affecting the brain. kidney, ED, osteoporosis, cancer. I mean, it's so now you can start to understand why I said that over 80% of doctor visits in the United States are related to this one condition. If it manifests as blockages in my brain, arteries to my brain, I'm more likely to have a stroke. If it manifests in the arteries to my heart, coronary arteries, I'm more likely to have a heart attack. Could be wherever this is. One thing about it is, however, it's systemic. If I have chest pain, angina, I can tell you I also have blockages in my brain, arteries, and my other arteries of my body. It is not just one place, but it is true that oftentimes it first manifests in one location. Now, I want to ask you he didn't speak to this, but I think it's worth me telling you. He mentioned that Tim Russert, he started off with a story about Tim Russert. And Tim Russert, how long before he had his fatal heart attack at work had he gone to the cardiologist? 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He'd been to the cardiologist, been evaluated. I'm sure, I don't know the name, and it's probably good I don't know the name of the cardiologist, but I'm sure because Tim Russert was a famous and well-to-do man, he didn't have an inferior cardiologist. I'm sure he had a very good cardiologist. Let me tell you just real quickly why the best cardiologists in the world cannot tell you that you may have a heart attack tomorrow. Think about it for a moment. We're sitting here in a relaxed environment. Our pulse is probably at some of its lowest that we've had all day. We're relaxed. Hopefully you're relaxed. And so your heart rate is maybe, who knows, somewhere between 60 and 80 for most of you. Now, if the building starts shaking, the lights go out, and things start falling off of the ceiling, before you even get out of your seat, your heart rate can go up to 100, 120 or more. So what I'm trying to point out to you is that the heart vessels that supply blood were designed to provide a wide range of muscle activity. Because you're not going to get chest pain unless you have a problem. If we're healthy, when a catastrophe happens and we need extra blood pressure and extra oxygenation, and our heart starts beating faster, we don't have chest pain. So what I'm trying to get at is that's why we can only detect a blockage if it's at least blocking 70% of the blood flow. If it's only blocking 50%, we cannot tax your heart enough to know that it's even there. So that's why when they suspect it, they'll do an angiogram and look for it. Okay, so whereas in the brain, it's not the same. The brain actually works about as hard while we're sleeping as it does while we're awake. And so the arteries to the brain do not have nearly the reserve capacity that the arteries to your heart. That's why, just in case you are wondering, or someone would ask you, well, why didn't the cardiologist do his job? The cardiologist did do his job. You just can't tell that until there's more blockage than he had. The other thing I want to talk about is soft and hard plaque. You remember they talked about that. So Tim Russert had this evaluation. He had no serious blockages that were evident, but he had apparently a soft blockage. Do you remember that? So what happens is when the endothelium gets injured, the first thing that happens, it's sort of like if your skin got injured. And you know, when it's first injured, the first few days, do you have a big hard scab on there? Not really. It's so soft that if you rub it against the sofa or against something in the car, it peels off there and it's ready to bleed again. But after about a week or two, that doesn't rub off like that. It's hard, and in fact, you have to pick it off, which I recommend you don't do. And so the same thing in our blood vessels. When the new sores, if you want to call it that, are soft, and when they peel off, when that layer of soft protection peels off for some reason or another, usually because of a high volume blood flow, it exposes then the cholesterol and all the stuff inside the sore, and the blood clots. So when your blood is made so that when there's any kind of an injury or something, it forms a clot to stop you from bleeding to death. Well, in this case, it's not a very helpful thing because it stops the blood from getting to your heart. So, all right, that's enough about, I mean, it's amazing. I believe physiology is one of the most amazing subjects on the planet, but I'll quit anyway. But I want to show you this because, as was mentioned earlier, my wife and I travel. We do 10-day immersion programs. And it was interesting that Paula said I was immersed in immersions, and I guess that's true. But, and we just finished one in Michigan, and I wanted to show you the numbers, okay? So this is what actually just happened, and I always summarize. So what we have here is we have different measures. You can see across the two rows there. And you can see we have underweight, we have BMI, but we have the beginning and ending weights, blood pressure, cholesterol. And this is the average of the group that we were working with, okay? So this line here gives the average of these, and this line here gives the average of these down here. And if you look at the percent drop, to me that's so what do we find? We have the average drop in weight is about 2.5%, right? The average drop in blood pressure, systolic blood pressure, that's the high number, is 4%. In cholesterol, 16%. LDL, the bad cholesterol, 16%. Triglycerides, 34%. So you see how to read it, right? Fast. So blood sugar, down here I have the blood sugar numbers. Blood sugar average. Most of the people are not diabetic, but that doesn't mean their sugars are ideal. So we still have 11% drop. Those that are diabetic, there were 2 of them that were above that, they had a 23% drop. The more serious the worse, shall we say, your condition is, the more it improves with the exact same treatment. You know, we wish we could do that with medication. We give 1 dose to everybody and it would adjust itself to the right, but it doesn't work like that with medications. Anyway, this is the hemoglobin A1C drop in the diabetics. There was 3 that had over 6, and that was a 5% drop, and so forth. Sometime I'll talk to you when we talk about diabetes. I'll talk to you about this again, why we measured insulin. This is insulin resistance. The insulin resistance dropped 46%. It would be a safe bet. I could put some serious money on the wager that the majority of you have insulin resistance and don't even know it. Just like I could put a pretty safe bet that the majority of you have some kind of blockage in your arteries that you don't know about. The good news is that for the majority, most of you, it's not going to be a serious problem. Some it will. Now, this is quality of life. An SF-36 measures quality of life. We had a 20% improvement. And this is the Beck depression score. We had 36%. So anyway, I just wanted to show you this actual data from there were 15 people in this particular, it's a small one, but 15 people. And you can see that lifestyle change can be extremely effective. And as was mentioned, I did do some research. We spent about $2 million of your tax dollars, thank you very much, in the Marshall Islands, which is sometimes called the Pearl of the Pacific. So it was a pleasure to serve you over there. But at any rate, we did about a 3-year study in the Marshall Islands. They have about 40% of adults are either diabetic or pre-diabetic. 80% of the admissions to the hospital are from preventable complications of uncontrolled diabetes. So we found that the very same program that I use in these immersions worked in the Marshall Islands, and we had some tremendous results there. Okay, well, Paula, that's my time is up. So this is the good part. Paula's gonna talk to us about the taste samples. Yes. Oh, yes. He needs a microphone.
So this change.
Yeah, just tap on it a little bit until they know it's working.
So this change you're talking about here that you're showing in the graph. So this was over the 10 days that they were in the immersion program?
I'm sorry, the mic, I can't quite hear. I think you asked, was it over the 10 days? Is that what you asked? Actually, it wasn't. The labs were only 8 days apart.
So it's quite an impressive change.
It's unbelievable. I've had people in Lithuania, I had someone there in 10 days that had a 104-point drop in their cholesterol. Yes, I think that's Barbara's hand.
Yeah, so I've had a couple of those calcium heart scans. I went in once because I thought, oh, $49, cheap. I'm healthy, right? Well, no. So yeah, you're right. We might have it. And I instantly found a cardiologist that they sent me right upstairs. But there's the soft and the hard. Can they tell what kind of cholesterol or what kind of plaque is in there, or the age of the plaque in your heart somehow or another with the calcium scan?
I'm not aware. So the question is, can they tell about the type of plaque or the age? And I'm not aware, Barbara, of there being any test other than having to take tissue, have to take some of it. The ultrasound can tell us that it's there, and they can tell us how dense it is, but it really can't tell us. But as he mentioned, the oxidized LDL cholesterol is the most common thing that injures the endothelium, the lining that starts that whole thing. Okay, I think we ought to, yeah, it's a quarter till, as I believe.
Yes, because we want to have time for a little taste. I hope you want to have time. So this evening, and you can thank Chris here. So this evening, our taste samples. So we're just doing samples of some plant-based foods, just because maybe these are things you haven't tried before. So we want you to taste it to see, hopefully you'll like it. You may not like every sample we do, but tonight we're having blueberry muffins. We have little tiny blueberry muffins that we'd like you to try. We have the recipe there because as you look in the recipe, we did keep it plant-based. So there are no eggs in it, but chia seeds were used, right? And different kinds of flour. So I'll let you look at the recipe so you can see what was in there. And I'm looking at John because he is my husband and he is our baker today. So they're really good. I sampled 2 already just to make sure they were okay. So if you go out the doors and go left, go past the restrooms, there'll be a table there. Help yourself. And I think she has some hot tea, some waters if you need anything to drink. So thank you so much for coming this evening. And we hope to see you
We'll
tomorrow.
have a blessing? Okay, well, why don't we just have a blessing before we eat? Our Father, we're thankful for these amazing bodies you've given us, and we ask that now as we taste these samples that you'll bless that to our health and strength. And if we need to make some changes, I pray, oh Lord, that you will impress us with that and empower us to do it. In Christ's name, amen.